Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss how Tory efforts to wangle some tax cuts in next year's budget may force the general election to be in May rather than the following autumn, as current Conservative thinking in the media is aligned. Basically, if they want their tax cuts, they can't really afford to wait much longer for the election after announcing them. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So the country is ready for a general election now. Most people realise that not only is everything worse compared to 2010, but the current Conservative leadership has absolutely no plan to fix anything. They've even explicitly stated that they are going to focus on culture wars. That's their plan. And Labour are offering more credible alternatives as well. So understandably, we're all trying to read the runes on when the election is going to be. The timing is, of course, up to the Conservatives. The general problem for them is that the longer they leave it, the worse it gets for various crises that the government are just not addressing. Whether it be the crisis in the NHS, that'll be worse next year. The cost of living crisis, that'll be worse next year. The mortgage crisis, that'll definitely be worse next year. The asylum crisis, I could go on. So you'd think an election sooner rather than later then. And that was why there has always existed this window for this autumn. But why not this autumn? Well, current polling shows the Tories on for a proper pummeling should an election take place. Now, I do always caution that when you look at anything based on voting intention polls, it does miss something very important. So don't take it as gospel. It's not a cock-up. It's just you can't do anything about it. There are a lot of don't knows who will vote. But at the moment, they're saying they don't know who they'll vote for. So there's not a lot you can do about that in the polls. A lot of these will be Conservative voters who cannot bring themselves to say they would vote for the current mess. There may be some who are looking at it and going, well, I don't really want to vote for anyone, but come the election, they will vote tactically against the Tories as well. But pollsters believe that the bulk of these don't knows who will vote are Conservatives. You know, they just cannot bring themselves to say they'll vote for them now, but come the election, their minds will focus. They will believe that Labour will somehow be worse. They'll hold their nose and they will vote Conservative. So the polls will tighten a bit because of that. That being said, I also think there's every chance that Rishi Sunak will deliver a Theresa May level of hopeless campaign once the election is called. Note how he had no personal impact on the local elections and was actively hiding during the key part of the recent by-elections. Like on the day of polling itself, Rishi Sunak was adopting radio silence. Even though one of those by-elections, Uxbridge and South Ruislip, which they won, was really tight and it needed all the assets the Tories had. Sunak was clearly not considered one of those assets because he was nowhere to be seen or heard of. So it's like there's no good time for the Tories to go to the polls, which means there is every chance that when they do trigger the election, it will be reactionary, not part of any long-term plan, but I can discuss that in another video. At the moment, it looks like they're just leaving it in the blind hope that something miraculous happens. But as I was discussing yesterday, there are a lot of Tory MPs who think that their own personal election chances hinge on tax cuts. It's their answer to everything, isn't it? Oh, cut taxes, that would be marvellous. Seemingly not at all put off by what happened when Liz Truss did just that last summer, Tory MPs are hammering on Hunt's door to get busy with it. Now, I don't know how many Tory MPs are insisting on tax cuts or how determined they are. But if there's a strong impetus for these tax cuts within the parliamentary party, so large that Sunak and Hunt cannot dismiss them, then it might actually force that summer election that I've sort of thought is most likely for a while for various reasons. And the reason in this case is as follows. So if you announce tax cuts in the budget in March, let's say, that's the latest, that's the major tax announcement. They have to come into effect in April. Nobody seriously believes that the Tories can afford tax cuts, much less the £15 billion worth they are proposing. Ordinarily, when the Tories talk about tax cuts, we know what they really mean are public service cuts. They've been doing it since 2010, and yet because cutting public services always leads to poor economic growth, because businesses need them, they end up having to put the taxes back up to compensate for falling tax revenues. This is why we have the highest tax burden since the post-war rebuilding years. Except instead of using those taxes to pay for the establishment of something useful, like the NHS, we're just making multimillionaires richer. Economists know that there isn't really scope for tax cuts, no matter who wins the next election. They know that if the Tories try, they will have to put them back up soon after the election. Everyone knows it would be a con, apart from maybe the voters they're targeting. But more than that, the markets will react. Recently, Paul Johnson of the Institute for Fiscal Studies was reported saying any announcement to cut taxes before the general election would likely have the result of raising interest rates further. Now, they are already going to be higher by next March's main budget statement than they are now. Announcing tax cuts would raise them higher still. Now, for anyone with a mortgage or even paying rent, that increase in tax rates could cost them more than the savings on their income tax. The bottom line is the government keep insisting that giving people more disposable income is inflationary. That's how they're justifying lower wages, right? Well, what is reducing taxes other than, in their own words, putting more money in your pocket? Well, what are people going to do with that money in their pocket? Spend it. Oh, is that inflationary? The Bank of England have been raising interest rates to squeeze disposable incomes. They're not even shy about saying that they're doing it for that reason. They call pay rises inflationary, so they must be curbed. Stop having pay rises. But they do not attack the much higher rises in corporate profits. The Bank of England, for whatever reason, are targeting the disposable income of ordinary workers, but not at all corporate profits. Well, what if the IFS, what they're saying is that if Hunt cuts taxes, the Bank of England will react in a very predictable way, and Sunak and Hunt will be aware of this as well. This would suggest to me that if the Tories want to announce those tax cuts, they will have to do so very close to the election itself, so that they can go to the polls before the reactions kick in. That would suggest to me that they would not announce tax cuts in this autumn's budget statement. They would wait for the last possible moment in March. Sunak will tell his MPs to hold tight, that the economic conditions are not yet right, but that they expect them to be next spring. Hunt makes his budget speech, MPs have their say about it, then Sunak stands up in the House and calls the general election. Hunt may even have little private conversations along the lines of, don't you raise interest rates before the election or I'll overrule you and sack you. Now, this doesn't mean that the May election is certain, just that if they want their tax cuts in next year's budget, I see no other course of action. If they announce tax cuts, what experts are consistently saying is that there will be a reaction, and not one we would want. In the worst case scenario, the reaction will be a loss of confidence in the markets and you have a Liz Truss level meltdown. In the slightly less worst case scenario, you have the Bank of England raising interest rates even higher and being very clear that they are raising them because the tax cuts are a poor economic choice. The idea of announcing tax cuts in March and expecting to have an election late, like in October, seems insane when you take all of this into account. Unless, of course, Sunak and Hunt are actually expecting an economic recovery in the next 6 months, the likes of which no independent economist thinks possible, much less likely. In which case, come the time to finalise their budget, there may be something of a panic. But it doesn't seem to me that they can have their tax cuts and a later election. It seems to be one or the other. Besides, the last thing the Tories want to do is announce a budget which could go badly wrong and then leave the election until the following autumn or worse still, winter. If you're going to announce tax cuts and it's going to trigger a bad reaction which hits your economy instead of helping it, the impact will be felt much more keenly in autumn and winter. Not only will more time have passed, that's when the cost of living naturally goes up. Much better to have the election sooner before the consequences are known and you can make the policy sound marvellous, but people don't actually see what it's going to be really like. So if there are tax cuts announced in March, I don't see how there's not an election in May. Assuming the Tories don't actually want to lose all of their seats, that is. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.